In our previous module, we spoke in some length about Thomas's doctrine of the divine processions, and most of our attention focused on the filiation of the Son from the Father and the spiration of the Spirit from the Father and the Son, and we spoke very briefly about Thomas's doctrine of the Father. I want to spend time focusing on Thomas's doctrine of the Father as the principle for the unity of the essence within the Trinity, in order to contrast it with Calvin's doctrine of an irreducible tripersonal essence. And so there will be a bit of review but expansion here, focusing in precisely on Thomas's understanding of the Father relative to the unity of the essence and relative to the communication of the essence to the Son and from the Father and Son to the Spirit. Thomas makes a central claim about the nature of the Father when he speaks of him as the principle of the Son and Spirit. He has a doctrine of the Father as the principle of the Son and the Holy Spirit. Here is the first structural insight that you need to grasp and keep in mind all along as we understand this. Thomas speaks of the Father as the principle of the Son and Spirit, and we must grasp that the Father has two distinct personal properties as the principle. On the one side, we can speak of the fact that he is unbegotten. On the other side, we speak of his paternity in the act of filiation. So when you think of the Father simpliciter, in himself he is unbegotten. When you think of him in the taxis, you think of him in paternal relation to the Son. When Thomas speaks then of the principle of the Father, it is from his status as principle that we can perceive his incommunicable personal properties, unbegotten as Father. Now, when Thomas speaks of the language of a principle, he says, quote, principle, quote, without specifying how the origination happens, the name principle means an order of origin. An order of origin. You need to take time and get that down. A principle does not specify the way that one thing originates another, but it does establish an order of origin, an order in which one thing comes to be in relation to another who has produced it. But the nature of the production is not determined by the conception of principle. Let me put it simply. That an agent produces another as principle is the concept, not how he does so. So to speak of the Father as the principle of the Son is to speak of him as the one from whom the Son originates. Thomas is explicit about this. He says, quote, of all the terms relating to origin, the word principle is most appropriate to God. For since we are unable to comprehend the things of God, it is better for us to indicate them by means of general terms which have an indefinite meaning than to employ special words that have definite signification. So, end of quote. So, the Father is the principle of the Son in that he precedes the Son in the order of origin. That's the concept Thomas is after. But now we have to ask the question, how does Thomas address what is common to the divine essence and what is proper to each Trinitarian person if he affirms the Father is the principle of the Son, and principle means an order of origin for the Son? Well, Emery helps us grasp something foundational to Thomas's entire treatment of God. It is a distinction in Thomas between what is common in the Godhead and what is proper in the Godhead. And this distinction here is going to be important because we're going to return to it. Common and proper. What is common pertains to the divine essence. What is proper pertains to the divine persons. Emery gives us this summary of Thomas, and we'll look at him here in a second. Quote, "The common is very precisely signified by the phrase, that which concerns the divine essence." So when you're talking about what is common, it's clear essence is in view. On the other hand, the properties, is designated by the phrase, that which concerns the distinction of the persons. So, the treatise on God is structured by the combination of the investigation of the divine essence common to all three persons, questions 2 through 26, and the properties which distinguish the persons, questions 27 through 43. So hear this and aim for understanding. Thomas wants to affirm what is common and what is proper in the Trinity. What is common pertains to the essence. What is proper pertains to the persons. Emery goes on to clarify, St. Thomas further refines this point when he notes that in our conceptual order, common precedes proper. We grasp the divine essence before we grasp the personal properties. And here's a quote from Thomas. "Common terms taken absolutely in the order of our intelligence come before proper terms, because they are included in the understanding of proper terms, but not conversely. In effect, when we grasp the person of the Father, the notion of God is included in that, but not conversely." End of quote. So the essence, which is common, is grasped first in the order of understanding, and then what is proper. Thomas says the mind grasps what is common in the essence first, and then what is proper to each person. Thomas seeks to affirm this distinction, but we need to recognize that he collapses it in his understanding of the processions. What do I mean by that? Well, let me put it this way. There is one movement in the processions where what is common and what is proper converge in the Father alone. And I'm going to call this right here, and this is a key concept, the reducible paternal essence. The reducible paternal essence. It's critical to grasp this. The Father is the principle, not only of the Son and Spirit, but he is the principle of the unity of the essence in the Godhead. Since in terms of processional logic, the entirety of the essence belongs initially to the Father as principle without principle and as source of the being of the Son and Spirit. So the essence is reducible to the Father because he is principle without principle, And he is also source of the Son and the Holy Spirit in terms of being the active communicative agent of the essence. Thomas says, quote, "The proper, proprium, is that which belongs to a single person constituting its distinctive characteristic or property. On the other hand, the common is nothing other than the divine essence. That which is common to the whole Trinity concerns the unity of the essence and not the distinction of persons." So on the one hand, Thomas affirms the proper common distinction, yet on the other hand, Thomas says that the essence of God, viewed from the standpoint of the processions themselves, can be envisioned initially in the Father alone. The unity of the essence is processionally reducible to the person of the Father. And he says this, "When we consider the properties of the persons, we find the notion of, as it were, first principle in the Father. And it is in virtue of the unity of a principle without principle that the same nature is communicated to all within each nature. This is why it is through the Father that all is one." Now, what does that mean? We need to be clear here. Thomas elides what is common and proper in the person of the Father, understood processionally. The Father is the first principle of the Son and Spirit. And precisely in light of what is proper to the Father as principle without principle, you find him communicating what is common to the three persons, namely the essence. The Father is the first principle of the Son and the Spirit, and as first principle, he communicates the unity of nature to the Son and to the Holy Spirit. Thus, through the Father, all are one. So while Thomas seeks to maintain the common proper distinction with regard to essence and persons in other places, he conflates or collapses that distinction when it comes to the person of the Father possessing the yet to be communicated, yet to be tripersonalized essence within the divine processions. And when I say yet to be communicated, I mean that when we think of the Father's person as principle and source of the other persons in the Godhead, we must also think of him as principle and source for the essence of the other persons. I have in view a pre-processional conception of the Father's person that contains within itself the unity of the yet-to-be tripersonalized essence of God. And that's why I call Thomas's view a reducible paternal essence in light of the divine processions. Thomas himself says this, "As a unity of form unfolds from unity of principle, so the consubstantial unity of the Trinity comes from the person of the Father." Let me say that again. As the unity of form unfolds from unity of principle, so the consubstantial unity of the Trinity comes from the person of the Father. The Father is the principle of the unity of essence within the Godhead. Now, Emery unpacks this in the Trinitarian Theology of Thomas Aquinas on page 173, and he says this, "St. Thomas has explained earlier that the identity of the natures of the three persons amounts for their unity, but in this very unity, it can be envisioned under the aspect of the person of the Father himself, or rather in the Father's person. So on the one hand, the identity of nature of the three persons accounts for their unity. Thomas can say, in other words, that there is a unity of essence among three consubstantial persons. That is his post-processional conception. But on the other hand, he can say that the tripersonal essence is reducible to the person of the Father. That is his pre-processional conception of the essence. The identity of the nature of the three persons can be envisioned or envisaged in the Father's person prior to the act of generation and spiration. So Emery, expounding Thomas, is saying that the tripersonal unity of the essence can be envisioned uniquely under the aspect of the person of the Father alone. Now, from this, we can derive two penultimate conclusions. For Thomas, the essence of God, as it is envisioned processionally, in the Father as the principle without principle, in the Father as the order of principle within the Trinity. For Thomas, the essence of God, as it is envisioned processionally in the person of the Father, is tripersonalized in the processions of the Son and the Spirit. The essence resides initially in the person of the Father alone, and then from the Father, the essence unfolds with generation and with spiration. And secondly, just because of this, because the essence of God is tripersonalized, the essence cannot be irreducibly tripersonal for Thomas. This is so because you can always take the unity of the essence back to the person of the Father, so that you have a pre-processional, reducible essence located in the person of the Father alone. So, while Thomas can affirm the tripersonal unity of the essence, it is an essence that has been tripersonalized as it unfolds in procession from the Father. Emery summarizes this so well. This is from his work on Thomas, his Doctrine of the Trinity, the Trinitarian Theology of St. Thomas Aquinas. He says, the divine unity would therefore be appropriated to the Father because the Father is the principle of unity in the Trinity. Just as unity of form unfolds from unity of principle, so the consubstantial unity of the Trinity comes from the person of the Father. The unity of the three persons is not taken solely from the level of their common divinity, but also issues from the relations which Son and Holy Spirit have with the Father. The Son and Holy Spirit are drawn from the Father, who bestows his unity on the Trinity. End quote. You see, you can't be much clearer than that. The Father is the principle of unity within the Trinity. So what is common flows from what is proper. In fact, what is common is collapsed into what is proper to the Father. So Thomas has two distinct ways of conceiving of the essence. A pre-processional paternal essence, envisioned in the Father alone, and a post-processional triune essence that processes along with generation and spiration. Now here's the question. What seems to be the ultimate reason for Thomas' reduction of the unity of the essence to the Father? Why would he do that? Well, Thomas's unique rationale for this construction appears in his appropriation of the Dionysian exitus reditus model. if you remember this from last lecture, exitus and reditus is a Dionysian and Neoplatonic structure that Thomas appropriated and utilized to explain his Trinitarian theology of procession. The Son and Spirit are in an exitus from the Father and return to Him. Creatures are created in an exitus and returned by grace in a reditus to the Father through the Son and through the Holy Spirit. But Legg, remember, insightfully commented that, quote, Thomas begins with the Neoplatonic conception of exitus and reditus, part of the common Dionysian heritage that he received from his master, Albert the Great, and that he shares with St. Bonaventure. That's from his Trinitarian Christology of Thomas Aquinas. See, Thomas leveraged the unity of the Father as the essence of God in the service of a Neoplatonic Dionysian exitus reditus model where everything emanates from the one in the Neoplatonic conception. Everything emanates from the one in the Dionysian mystical tradition. The Father is the source of unity, as is the good in Neoplatonic Dionysian metaphysics. And the Son and the Spirit proceed from and return to the single source of the Father, just as all things emanate from and return to the good in the Dionysian Neoplatonic model. Emery's very useful when he clarifies this. Listen to what he says. The language by which we refer to the Father as the principle can be further enriched by other names. Later on, our investigation of unbegottenness will bring out the Augustinian terms, principle without principle, and principle of divinity, which, by the way, I believe Augustine has a different understanding than Thomas on this issue, and I think that can be proved. But to continue the quote, and other expressions coming from the Greek fathers. For the moment, we will mention the word source, fonts, from which St. Thomas took mainly from the pseudo-Dinis, the pseudo-Dionysian tradition, but also from Athanasius and Cyril of Alexandria. The language of originary plenitude is more common in the commentary on the sentences, but one also finds it in the Summa. Thomas can easily take this on board by connecting the name to the foregoing analysis. The Father is named the source under the aspect of principle without principle. You see, Thomas is explicit that principle and source of unity in the Godhead resides in the Father. And the reason why it works so well in his system is it perfectly adapts into the hierarchical structure of Neoplatonic and pseudo-Dionysian philosophies and mysticism. Neoplatonic philosophy, Dionysian mysticism. And so the unity of the three persons arises from an act of essential communication from the Father that is the source of the exitus reditus model of divine and human processions. This structures the entire theology of Thomas's Summa. The Father is the source and end, as Emery says, of the whole economy. The Father anchors the exitus and reditus theme in Thomas's system of theology. Now, why is this so important? This provides an indispensable background for understanding the need to reform Trinitarian doctrine as the history of the Church proceeds. Thomas's medieval adaptation of Neoplatonic and pseudo-Dionysian categories of exitus and reditus his folding the essence into the person of the Father so that the essence is then tripersonalized through processions and communication. That won't do. Number one, it doesn't answer clearly the Eastern conception of the Father as arche or source of the Son and Spirit's being. Number two, it doesn't challenge Islamic conceptions of a bare unity of God that doesn't stand in need of any kind of tripersonalizing. And third, it serves that entire systematic expression of Thomas's sacerdotalism. Thomistic sacerdotalism finds its origin in the Father as the unity principle in the Trinity, as that theology is expressed in a Neoplatonic, Dionysian mystical framework. And the theology of the Reformation, particularly the theology of John Calvin, sought to be a corrective for any view that would introduce abstraction, hierarchy, or analogia entis into the doctrine of the Trinity, where the Father is the fountain of deity and there's a downward cascading communication of being from the Father to the Son and Spirit, and then from the Father, Son, and Spirit to the creature, affecting a move to the return to the source of that being, the Father. And we'll see in Calvin that the initial corrective step is to affirm, without wavering, an irreducible tripersonal essence as the foundation of all proper dogmatic reflection about God and his relation to the creature.